The clink of crystal stemware rang like brittle laughter inside the grand dining hall of the Sterling Club. A chandelier the size of a small car floated overhead, each prism catching light and shattering it across a sea of polished marble. The Sterling was not a restaurant. It was a stage built for the wealthy to perform opulence in front of one another, to prove by posture and possession that they belonged. And no one loved that stage more than Victor Caldwell. Victor strode in as though the air itself should make way, his navy silk suit tailored with such precision it seemed grown onto him. On his wrist, a watch whose price tag could have covered the salaries of everyone in the room combined. His laugh was loud, the kind that was designed to draw eyes, to remind the audience that here was a man who did not whisper. He was a millionaire many times over, and tonight he intended to make sure everyone knew it. "Champagne for the table," he announced, dropping a black titanium card onto the white tablecloth as though it were a gauntlet thrown. "The real stuff. Don't insult me with anything less than the Blanc de Blancs 82. The card caught the light. Even inanimate, it screamed money. The waitress who approached didn't flinch at his tone. She was younger, though not fresh-faced. Her eyes carried the faint weariness of someone who had seen nights like this before, nights where men pretended marble and crystal could turn them into gods. Her name tag read Elena, but her presence felt larger than the tiny brass plate. "Yes, sir," she said evenly, jotting the order without a trace of awe. Her voice had the softness of velvet, but with steel threaded through it. Victor leaned back in his chair, smiling like he owned the air she breathed. "Do you even know what that is? That bottle costs more than your car, more than your rent, I'd bet." There was no malice in his tone, at least not the kind he recognized. It was casual cruelty, a reflex of power, a showman playing to an imagined audience. Elena's pen paused mid-scratch. Her gaze lifted, meeting his for the briefest second. There was something unsettling there, like a mirror tilted at an angle he hadn't anticipated. "I know exactly what it is," she said. "And I also know what it isn't." She turned, walking toward the bar without waiting for his retort. Victor chuckled, shaking his head as if indulging a child. But the laughter didn't settle. The echo of her words clung to him, something about that look in her eyes. What it isn't. He brushed it off with another round of performance ordering oysters by the dozen, steaks rare enough to still tremble, desserts stacked like monuments. Each command was an offering to the god of excess, each swipe of his card a drumbeat in the opera of his wealth. But Elena kept returning, each time with a calm precision that refused to bend under the weight of his display. She carried plates like a surgeon carries scalpels, movements measured, eyes watchful. And every so often, Victor caught her looking at him with that same quiet intensity. Not contempt, not admiration, something colder, something closer to truth. It gnawed at him. The first real crack came midway through the meal. Victor, in a flourish of bragging, leaned across the table to his companions, 2 hedge fund managers, and a model whose laugh was louder than the champagne corks. "You know," he said, "this place once refused me a table, years ago. I told myself I'd come back and buy the whole damn building if I wanted. Look at me now." The model clapped her hands. The managers nodded with sycophantic smiles. Victor drank in their validation like it was oxygen. Elena set down a tray of oysters, her expression unreadable. And yet you're still here, proving it, she murmured, almost to herself. Victor's head snapped up. Excuse me? Her eyes flickered to his, then away. Nothing, sir. Enjoy. But the words had already landed. A shard buried deep. What am I proving? To whom? The laughter at the table rolled on, but Victor's glass trembled faintly as he lifted it. He told himself it was anger. How dare she? But beneath it pulsed something darker. Recognition. Because there was truth in her tone, and truth was the one thing money couldn't silence. That night, as the party dwindled and the Sterling's chandeliers dimmed, Victor lingered. He tipped extravagantly, almost violently, tossing bills like confetti onto the table. But Elena did not thank him. She merely collected the plates with the same steady grace, her eyes holding him one last time, as if memorizing a detail he didn't know he carried. And when he left, sliding into the back of his black car, the quiet of the leather seats pressed in on him, heavier than any chandelier could. But waiting in his breast pocket, folded with precision, was something that hadn't been there when he arrived. A napkin, cheap paper, creased twice. On it, written in neat block letters. You can't spend your way out of what's coming. Victor stared at it, the letters burning against his skin. A chill crawled up his spine, foreign and unwelcome. He didn't show it to the driver. He didn't tell his companions, but he couldn't let it go. Because deep down, in a place he hadn't visited in years, Victor Caldwell knew that the truth had finally found him. And it was wearing a waitress's uniform. The city slept in fractured increments beneath the glass wall of Victor's bedroom. Traffic lights pulsing like distant heartbeats. A siren's red coil unwinding and vanishing. Steam rising in slow breaths from a manhole on a side street that emptied into a darker one. The penthouse had been staged to impress magazine photographers. Stone, steel, curated warmth. But at 3 a.m, it felt like a mausoleum where sound went to disappear. He lay awake on the edge of a bed that had cost more than the average sedan, watching the faint glow of the digital clock glide from 3:07 to 3:00, as if taunting him with the possibility of rest. The napkin was on the nightstand, its cheapness an assault in a room that preferred things that had names and provenance and plaques. He turned it over again, as if a second sentence might appear. You can't spend your way out of what's coming. Even the period at the end landed with finality, like a gavel or a door clicking shut. He told himself he was being rational when he slid out of bed at 3:22, pulled on a shirt, and padded barefoot across the cold floor to the small office tucked off the main hall. He told himself it was simply due diligence when he called the Sterling Club's private line and asked for the night manager. Money, after all, lubricated everything. Tracks for information to run smooth and fast. Mr. Caldwell, a voice answered on the second ring, obsequious and sleep-thick. What can I do for you, sir? My table tonight. I want the camera feed. A hesitant breath on the line. Sir, I'll have to speak to... You'll have to press play, Victor said. I'm not asking you to invade a nation-state. Pull the feed. The silence stretched, and he imagined the manager. What was his name? Holt? Weighing variables. The Sterling protected its own mythology, but it protected the top tier of that mythology with extra care. He heard keys clicking, a muttered apology to someone off-screen, Then the small staccato sounds of a system waking. "I have a window open," Holt murmured. "Time? 9:15 to 9:30, roughly." Another series of clicks. A pause, a longer one. "Mr. Caldwell, This is awkward. The system, it logged a maintenance ping at 21:17. It resumes at 21:29. The segment is... It's dark." Victor straightened. "Dark? As in down. Our IT contractor noted a sensor error. It's documented." Papers shuffled. "Signed by an E. Reyes. Temporary outage on the dining hall grid." Reyes. His mind flashed to the small brass name tag on Elena's uniform. Elena, no last name, just the beginning of one etched on metal. E. Reyes. Hard to recall exactly. His tongue went heavy in his mouth. "I want that document," he said. "I'll email the scan," Holt replied quickly. "Don't email it. Have a copy on my desk by 8 a.m. He paused. "And one more thing. If anyone asks, we never spoke." He ended the call before Holt could assure him of the obvious. He sat in the dark a full minute longer, a habit he'd developed over the years when his instincts hummed at a frequency he preferred to ignore. Instincts were messy. Numbers were pure. Yet, in the silence, another twitch. The second hand on his watch picked forward with a soft mechanical tick, precise and unbothered, as if reminding him that time is the one currency that refuses to be bullied. By 8 o'clock, a thick manila envelope had been delivered by hand to his reception desk downstairs. Victor tore it open in the elevator and sifted through copies. A maintenance log printed on company letterhead, a timestamp, 21:17:04 to 21:29:31, a signature block scrawled with neat, boxy letters. E. Reyes. There was a second document, a repair invoice from a contractor he didn't recognize. He noted the numbers anyway. 1,825. Paid, marked, paid, in blue gel ink that bled slightly into the paper. The elevator chime announced the lobby, where the air smelled faintly of citrus and varnish. He moved to the building's curb, slid into his black car, and told the driver to head to the office. The morning had the brittle chill of wealth, crisp, efficient, slightly disdainful. On the way, he pulled up the file on a tablet and read the contractor's name 3 times. Reyes Electrical and Systems. The business address was a low industrial strip across the river, suite numbers that changed hands every few months, the kind of place where 100 unrelated ventures shared a single flickering fluorescent light. It could be legitimate. It could be a well-dressed ghost. The feeling in his chest suggested the latter. He didn't go to the office. He told his driver to detour, a word that had always yielded results. The industrial strip smelled like old metal and damp cardboard. A forklift beeped somewhere behind a corrugated metal door. Unit C7 had the kind of tint on its windows that made the glass look clogged with smoke. An open sign blinked weakly, promising presence and delivering questions. Inside, a tired-looking man watched a small television behind a counter strewn with cable ties and manuals. His shirt pocket read, Reyes, in stitched navy letters. Victor showed him the invoice. "Who signed this?" he asked. The man squinted. "That's our stamp," he said slowly. "But that is not my handwriting." "E. Reyes?" Victor pressed. The man shook his head. "My last name is Reyes. My daughter's name Starts with an E. She doesn't work here. He glanced at the invoice again, then up at Victor with a curiosity that had not been present a minute earlier. You the one from the Sterling? Yes. Another slow nod. Funny, the man said. My shop hasn't been to the Sterling in 4 years. Victor left with the invoice burning his palm, a rectangle of heat in a morning that had gone suddenly cold. In the car, he stared at the signature until the letters blurred and reassembled. The arrogance of using Reyes's own vendor to forge a maintenance cover bold, but reckless. Or it was a message. I know what you'll check, and I can plant footprints on the path. When he reached his office, he told his assistant to clear his schedule. He shut the door and opened a spreadsheet himself, something he almost never did anymore. The Caldwell, charitable trust, his small armor against accusations of hollow philanthropy, contained line items that had always soothed him. Numbers with tidy endings, grants that translated into photos of ribbon cuttings and step and repeat banners. But now, the decimals looked like questions. $2,400,000 dispersed to 2 community centers that had quietly closed 6 months later. $350,000 to an education initiative that existed mostly as a website with stock photos and a newsletter that hadn't updated since spring. He scrolled until a line stirred something uglier than suspicion. $1,200,000 to Garden Street Redevelopment Partners, LLC. It wasn't one of his entities. It wasn't on his approved vendor list. It was a name that evoked trees where there were none, something polite draped over a mechanism built to tear. He dialed his CFO. Gaines, Garden Street Redevelopment. What is it? Redevelopment arm, Gaines replied without missing a beat. We partner with them to rehabilitate blighted zones. We partner with ourselves, Gaines. That's our whole appeal. If we partner with strangers, we're just donating and praying. Who vouches for them? I don't see the due diligence file. A shuffle of papers. It might be. Let me 1 second. Longer pause. The file is in legal's queue, waiting for counsel sign-off. It's routine. Find it, Victor said, or find out why it doesn't exist. He hung up and sat back. Routine was a word people used when they meant don't ask. He drummed his fingers against the desk, the sound small and sharp in the cavernous office, until his intercom buzzed softly. Someone is here to see you, his assistant said cautiously. From the Sterling. For a fractured moment, he assumed Holt had come to grovel. But it wasn't the manager who stepped in. It was Elena, wearing street clothes that made her look less like a service worker and more like someone whose presence demanded fewer assumptions. Jeans, a charcoal sweater, a dark coat that didn't advertise a brand. Her hair was pulled back. Her gaze was bare. I'm aware this is unusual, she said, before he could ask how she'd gotten past security. But you left without dessert. He stared at her, then at the napkin on his desk, then back to her. His mouth shaped words that didn't agree on which one should land first. She smiled, but it was a small, functional thing, an ID card at a checkpoint. I'm not here to fight, she said. I'm here because you read it. He didn't answer. The note, she continued, tipping her chin toward the napkin. Some people laugh it off or toss it. Some people make phone calls. You made 3 before dawn. How do you know? She glanced at the glass wall behind him. It's a browser world. You'd be amazed what pings and logs whisper when they think no one is listening. She took a careful breath. I'm going to say some things you don't have to believe. You can escort me out when I'm done. But if you listen, you'll be in the room when truth arrives, instead of under it. Who are you? He asked. A waitress, she said. And for a heartbeat, he almost laughed, because the deadpan landed, even as it skittered past irony. Then she added, and someone who understands what it costs to be on the wrong end of a system that pretends to help and quietly harvests. Systems don't have faces. They borrow them. Right now, yours is one of them. He stood, feeling the strange, adolescent heat of defensiveness rising in his throat. You don't know anything about what my companies do. I know about Garden Street, she said. Not a question. I know about the properties acquired under the banner of renewal and flipped into investment-grade residences that price out the families your trust just posed with at a photo op. I know about the 2 centers your grants helped refurbish and then shutter when the maintenance budget unexpectedly tripled. I know the developer fee that bounced to a consulting firm in Delaware that employs exactly 4 people and rents a mailbox. Something in him hardened. This is libel. This is documented. Her voice did not rise. That steadiness was more unnerving than anger. Not all of it is on you. That's the part you don't want to look at. Because if it isn't entirely your fault, then it might be in your power to fix it. And that requires a different kind of wealth. He heard the line he would normally deploy. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? And felt its emptiness before he even tried to lift it. He turned to the window instead, the city obligingly glittering for anyone who needed a reminder that they were important. How did the napkin get into my pocket? He asked finally, conceding an inch of ground he didn't remember deciding to give. She tilted her head. You ordered oysters. I brought them. You placed your jacket behind you on the chair. You laughed at your own story about buying the building. You told your companions about the time you were turned away years ago. You performed for the mirror that is every rich room. You forgot the smallest things are often what change the scene. It was not an answer. It was a staging note. He realized she had never actually told him that she had done it. He realized that she had not confirmed anything at all. He moved back to the desk and put both hands flat on the polished surface. The reflection in this dark wood looked younger, as if anger had the petty magic of erasing a decade. If you have proof, why are you in my office instead of a courtroom? Because courtrooms like clean narratives, she said. And because I don't want to burn people who can be salvaged. I am not interested in vengeance. I'm interested in repair. You can be one more face in a lineup of men who learned nothing, or you can walk in front of the story and turn it. Her phone buzzed softly in her coat. She glanced at it and tucked it away without checking. The restraint felt theatrical until he realized it was practical. She didn't want to spook him with any hint of choreography. What do you want? He asked. To see whether you want the thing you're avoiding, she said simply. We leave the world tidy by telling ourselves our generosity erases our extraction. But math is math. You can't spend your way out of what's coming. You can only change the spend. He barked a laugh that surprised him by not sounding like his own. And if I say no? If I tell security to escort you out and call my lawyers? Then the thing that's coming will arrive without you. Her eyes flicked to the napkin. And you'll get to spend a lot more explaining why you ignored a gift. A gift. He almost laughed again, but the word burrowed. He had grown up believing gifts were just loans, dressed in nicer wrapping. His father had said that once, a man who worked 2 jobs and treated pride like bread necessary, stale, hard to swallow if you let it sit too long. "Meet me tonight," she said, and the ease with which she shifted into instruction startled him more than the request itself. She slid something small across the desk. Another napkin, this one folded with crisp care. "Dockside Storage, Unit 12, 11:45 p.m. Don't bring anyone who wears cologne to work." He eyed the napkin, but did not touch it. "You expect me to show up at a storage facility at midnight because a waitress invited me?" "I expect you to pick a lane," she said. "Some men are very good at making a fortune and very bad at making a decision. The choice is to be useful or be in the way." He didn't remember moving his hand, but when she stood, he was holding the napkin. It felt heavier than paper should, as if it were carrying more than ink. When he flipped a corner up experimentally and saw nothing except a faint grid of intersecting lines. One of those cheap kitchen napkins where the texture is meant to suggest quality. He almost made a snide comment. Then he saw the numbers pressed faintly into the paper, not written so much as imprinted by whatever had been stacked on top of it before it came to him. 7. Then 12. Then the outline of something that looked like a capital. G. And then 3 vertical lines. He looked up, but she was already at the door. "You left without dessert," she said again, softer this time. Not a joke, but a code he hadn't learned yet. "Don't be late." After she left, he stared at the napkin until the grid and the numbers turned into something like a map. He tried to laugh at himself. He tried to summon the version of him who dismissed anything that didn't fit the ledger. He tried to remember the last time he went anywhere alone. At 10 p.m., he told his driver he wouldn't need him. The man watched him with trained neutrality, and Victor felt a child's flare of rebellion rise in his chest, absurd, almost charming in its immaturity. He buttoned a plain jacket, no watch, no cufflinks, no ring, and moved through the city like someone who had never learned to be unobserved. Dockside Storage had a security guard asleep in a booth with a tiny space heater whirring at his feet. The smell of damp concrete and dust was immediate and honest. Unit numbers hung on the roll-up doors in black stencil. He found in a row of similar metal mouths and stood listening for something that would tell him to turn around. The lock clicked before he touched it. The door rattled up, and with it came the soft, unceremonious sound of a fluorescent light flicking to life. The unit was deeper than he expected. Boxes were stacked neatly on pallets. A folding table sat against the back wall with a laptop and a small portable scanner that hummed like a patient animal. On the table lay a handful of documents, a phone with a cracked screen, and a stack of glossy photographs that didn't pretend to be art. A building with boarded windows, a sign that read, "Community Services Closed," with a date scrawled beneath. A kitchen with a taped X across a gas stove, a ledger page with 2 columns that didn't add up unless you believed in magic. Elena stood at the far end, sleeves pushed up, hair pinned back with a black clip that caught and released the light each time she moved. She didn't smile when she saw him. Not relief, not surprise. She treated his arrival like another data point. It steadied him in a way praise never did. Section 7.4, she said, pointing to a clause on a PDF open on the laptop. Contingencies on grant funds if the facility ceases operation within 12 months. Funds must revert to donor for redistribution to similar purpose. It's buried in every grant you've ever signed. Clever. Looks like accountability. In practice, it becomes leverage. He leaned over the screen. The clause was familiar because he had approved its language years ago as a deterrent to misuse. He had believed in it. He still wanted to. Now watch this, she said, flipping to a ledger. Garden Street takes possession of a property near a center your trust grants funds to. Rent triples. The center unexpectedly closes in 10 months and 23 days. Rent arrears are forgiven in exchange for a deed transfer. Section 7.4 kicks in. Funds as revert to your trust. Garden Street sells to a holding company at a markup. The community gets a photo of a ribbon they cut once. The story prints clean. The math makes a sound only some people learn to hear. There were photographs of board minutes, emails with subject lines that used safe words like synergy and streamline and optimize. There was a text thread where a mid-level executive joked about renaming a food pantry a boutique nutrition experience to attract donors. He read words he recognized from 1,000 glossy gala brochures and felt, absurdly, like he was reading them for the first time. "Who are you working with?" he asked, throat dry. "A coalition," she said. "Some lawyers who like rules, because rules can be used as weapons by the good as well as the cruel. Some people who grew up in the zip codes you profit from. A person who has keys to rooms where decisions get made." "And you?" he said, gesturing at the stacks. "How did you get this? Work long enough in the service industry, and rich rooms start talking to you like you're furniture," she said. "Furniture listens. Furniture remembers. Furniture has friends who understand the difference between gossip and evidence." He lifted one photograph and felt the sharp ache of recognition before his mind supplied the specifics. The facade belonged to a center he'd toured at a ribbon cutting. He could see his own hand poised around the scissors in another photo nearby, his smile perfect and useless. The date stamp beneath the "closed" sign landed like a hammer, 10 months and 19 days after the photo op. The cut line on a spreadsheet, 20 rows deep. Maintenance triple net. The kind of phrase that sent eyes skimming, the kind of cost that made budgets fold. "How much of this is me?" he asked, surprising himself by using the small pronoun he usually avoided in business contexts. "Enough to be responsible," she said. "Not so much that you can't be useful." He looked up quickly. "Useful how?" "Plant a flag in the truth. Then move the army." "Meaning?" "Meaning you will call a meeting tomorrow with your legal counsel and your CFO and your head of community impact and say the words most of your peers choke on. I was wrong. We are wrong. This stops today. And then you'll send a letter to the state attorney's office preemptively requesting a review of all grant agreements under Section 7.4 with full cooperation. You will identify every vendor with overlapping ownership with any of your entities and suspend contracts until independent review. You will post your findings publicly, not as a PR piece, but as a ledger. He exhaled, a short, humorless breath. You think I'll set myself on fire in my own house? I think you will stop pretending your house isn't connected to the neighborhood. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed. He turned reflexively. She didn't. Her stillness felt rehearsed, not for drama, but for survival. He picked up the cracked phone. Whose is this? A woman who ran the after-school program at one of the centers, Elena said. She lost her job when the rent tripled. 2 months later, her landlord raised her rent in the same building Garden Street improved. She recorded a call with the new property manager. Listen. He pressed play. A voice came through the tiny speakers. Tinny, but clear. Understand it's a hardship, Ms. Lopez, but your unit's market rate is significantly higher now that we've upgraded appliances. Opportunity has a cost. He stopped the recording. The phrase, opportunity has a cost, was one he could track back to the panel he'd sat on years ago at a conference where men explained neighborhoods to themselves. Why me? He asked finally, fully, because if the machine was this big, any gear would turn it. Why invite the top gear into the engine room? Because I watched you spend half a meal proving you could afford it, she said. Men who need to be seen sometimes learn faster how to see. Because someone at your table tonight laughed when you told your story about being denied a table once, and there were 2 beats where your eyes went somewhere else. Because underneath the theater, there might be a man who remembers he became rich to stop being small, not to make others so. He swallowed. The room smelled like paper and concrete, and the faint sweetness of the cleaner someone had used on the folding table. He realized he could remember the exact scent of the Sterling's napkins, their fake linen softness, the engineered weight in the hand. He realized he could not remember the last time someone had asked him to do something difficult without the promise of a check at the end. The fluorescent light buzzed. He set the phone down. What's the, G? He asked, tapping the faint impression on the napkin. G. Arden Street, she said. 3 properties, bought under 3 different shell names. Same owners at the end of the chain. Same attorney signing every 3rd document. The lawyer's mistake was vanity. He gave himself a pattern. He nodded, not because it was clever, but because the ugliness was tidy. The mind loved tidy, even when it used it to construct cages. He did the math without looking at a spreadsheet. The profit on those flips would be 7 figures. The photograph of his ribbon cutting would evolve into a punchline in a room where laughter wasn't kind. He tucked the napkin into his jacket. The gesture felt ceremonial. He wasn't sure if the ceremony was a funeral or a christening. Tomorrow, he said. I'll call the meeting. Tonight, she corrected gently, and he found himself liking the precision of her cruelty. Send the email now. Drafts become excuses if you sleep on them. He smiled despite himself, then caught it before it could become a habit. He pulled his phone and typed. Subject: Immediate audit and legal review. Section 7.4. Compliance. He copied himself, then his counsel, then Gaines, then the head of community impact, then the general inbox that fed the foundation's public voicemail so that his staff would wake up to reporters asking questions they hadn't written answers to yet. He hit send. The whoosh felt like jumping off a dock at night and trusting the cold water to be honest. Elena watched, her face giving him nothing. When he finished, she nodded once. Approval not given, only the acknowledgement of a step performed. "You're going to make enemies," she said. "The least interesting part of this is how loud they'll be." He thought of the men at the Sterling, how they liked him, because he was useful in the way a generous storm is useful to the parched. He thought of the phone calls he would receive in the morning from people who would phrase concern as collegiality. He thought of the way his name would be said at 2 different coffee shops by 2 different kinds of people, and how both would be correct. Would be, "What about you?" he asked. "What happens if this burns hot?" She shrugged one shoulder. "Service workers are easy to replace. That's what your friends tell themselves until the room goes quiet and no one brings the check." He tilted his head. That was almost funny. "It's not a joke," she said. "It's a schedule." Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked, a dull echo that sounded like someone knocking from the other side of a door. He looked at the stacks one more time, the documents, the photographs, the ledger entries that didn't understand shame, and felt that peculiar blend of dread and relief, reserved for moments when a life's architecture admits its flaws out loud. 11:45 was very specific, he said. "I had to make sure you were done practicing notes in the mirror." He followed her out. The roll-up door groaned as it slid down. The fluorescent light clacked off, leaving the corridor dim and agreeably anonymous. Outside, the air felt different, colder, maybe, or just less dishonest. He watched her walk toward a dark sedan that was too clean to be an accident. The driver nodded once when she slid into the back seat. He caught the slight glow of a laptop screen through the tinted glass. Undercover power, he thought. Not a costume with a zipper. A function. A role someone steps into and out of because the world keeps miscounting who gets to hold the keys. His phone vibrated. A reply from Gaines at 11:59 p.m. "This is highly irregular. Can we discuss in the morning?" Victor typed back before he could turn into the man he'd trained himself to be. "We'll discuss at 9 a.m. Legal present. Bring Garden Street files. This is not optional." He put the phone away. He stood alone in the industrial lot long enough to register the small, ordinary noises that money never hears. A dog barking 2 blocks away. Tires hissing on wet pavement. A metal sign tapping gently against a chain-link fence whenever the wind picked up. He walked toward his car and realized the napkin, both of them, were still in his pocket, as if paper had finally found a way to feel like weight. He did not try to imagine what was coming as a thing that could be bought. He tried, instead, to imagine it as a door he could open from the right side. He had always believed that fortune, properly managed, could bend the future to a shape that resembled his will. Standing there, jacket thin against the honest chill, he decided to test a different hypothesis. That the future sometimes arrived like a waitress with a quiet voice, placing something plain on the table and asking if he was finally ready to taste it. Morning light poured over Manhattan like a floodlight rather than a blessing, harsh, indiscriminate, showing flaws instead of hiding them. Victor Caldwell's office tower rose in the middle of it, glass glittering, a mirror that refused to reflect anything except itself. Inside, the air smelled of polished oak and expensive silence. The email he had fired off at midnight was now a live grenade in the inboxes of his closest executives. By 9:01 a.m., the blast radius was visible in the conference room. Gaines, pale and jittery, flipping through a stack of binders as though paper could shield him. The head of Community Impact, a woman named Leona Drake, trying to look supportive while her jaw tightened, and 3 legal counsels, all pretending they hadn't been summoned from sleep with panic in their throats. Victor walked in without ceremony, a plain suit, no tie, no watch. He carried only a folder and the napkin folded into his breast pocket, its presence both absurd and anchoring. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was steady, almost too steady. Gaines cleared his throat. "Victor, your your tone was urgent. I think perhaps some context is needed before we—" "The context," Victor cut in, "is that Garden Street Redevelopment Partners has been receiving millions from our trust. The context is that those millions were leveraged to buy out community centers, trigger Section 7.4, and funnel funds back to us. The context is that those centers then died quietly while our numbers looked tidy. That's the context." The silence afterward was thick, the kind of silence lawyers pray for because it means fewer words to clean up later. "Sir," one of the attorneys began carefully, "if these allegations are true—" "They're not allegations," Victor snapped. He threw a set of documents onto the table copies of the photos and ledgers Elena had shown him at the storage unit. He had spent the early hours scanning, printing, arranging them like evidence for a jury. "They're facts, and we're not going to wait until the Times decides to make a Sunday feature out of this. We're going to act." Leona's eyes flicked across the pages, then up at him. There was something in her gaze, part surprise, part gratitude, part disbelief. "And what exactly do you propose?" Victor took a breath. He could feel the napkin pressing faintly against his chest, absurdly insistent. "Full cooperation with state authorities, independent review of every contract, public disclosure of our findings." The lawyers shifted in unison, like birds startled by a gunshot. "Victor," Gaines hissed, "you're talking about self-incrimination. You're talking about handing over ammunition. This could expose us to—" "To what?" Victor shot back. "Liability? Headlines? Maybe prison?" His laugh was sharp, bitter. "Better to burn now than rot slowly while smiling for photographs." Leona closed the binder in front of her with a deliberate snap. "He's right." Everyone turned. "This isn't a PR issue," she continued, steady. "This is systemic rot. I've been flagging discrepancies for months, and no one wanted to hear it. If Victor is serious, then yes, we go to the authorities before they come to us." The lawyers began talking over one another, words like exposure and strategy and mitigation colliding in the air. Victor raised a hand, and the noise died. "This isn't negotiable," he said. "I've already made contact." It was a lie, but one with the weight of inevitability. He adjourned the meeting after an hour of legal gymnastics, leaving his executives pale and sweating. As he stepped into the corridor, he felt something unexpected. Not fear, not exactly, but momentum. Like a wheel that had finally broken free of the rut it had been grinding in for years. By noon, the phone calls began. First, a hedge fund friend with a voice slick as oil. "Vic, I heard you're poking around Garden Street. Word of advice, don't. These redevelopment guys, they're networked. You don't want to make enemies in real estate." Then a message from a board member, tone clipped and frosty. "We need to discuss your overreaction before donors start asking questions." By 3, someone had leaked his midnight email. A blog devoted to corporate accountability ran it under the headline, Millionaire Victor Caldwell calls for audit of his own foundation amid suspected fraud. The comments were merciless, split between praise for his courage and scorn for what they saw as performative self-flagellation. The truth, as always, was irrelevant. The story had a pulse now, and it wouldn't stop beating. At 5 o'clock, Elena appeared again. Not at his office this time, but at a small cafe 2 blocks away, where she sat with a cappuccino cooling in front of her, eyes scanning the room with the calm of someone who expected surveillance. "You leaked it," Victor said, sliding into the chair opposite her. She arched a brow. "You sent the email. I just made sure it had legs." "You're playing with my life." "No," she said softly. "I'm making sure you don't back out." He wanted to protest, but the truth lodged in his throat. Because, yes, if it had stayed quiet, maybe the lawyers would have found a way to bury it, to soften it, to transform righteous anger into a 6-month review process that produced a glossy PDF and nothing else. Now, there was no turning back. "What happens next?" he asked. Her eyes softened, just for a moment. "Now, the machine pushes back." She was right. The pushback began that night. His phone buzzed with an unknown number. When he answered, a voice low and deliberate spoke. "Mr. Caldwell, you're making noise. Noise is expensive. Be careful." The line went dead. At midnight, his driver texted him a blurry photo. 2 men in dark coats lingering across the street from his building, one smoking, the other staring straight at the camera. No caption needed. Victor sat in the dark of his penthouse, city lights crawling across the windows, and for the first time in years, he felt the shape of fear unbuffered by money. Money bought lawyers, guards, gated entries, but it could not buy silence from men whose business model depended on shadows. He thought of the napkin. You can't spend your way out of what's coming. The next day brought another meeting, this one with state investigators who had seen the blog post. They came without fanfare, 3 officials in gray suits who asked questions in voices that gave away nothing. Victor provided what documents he had, forcing his staff to open files they'd hoped would stay sealed. When the officials left, Gaines looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Do you realize what you've done? You've put us under a microscope. If there's one misstep in your personal finances, then let them find it," Victor said. His voice carried something it hadn't in years: conviction without calculation. That evening, Elena sent him a message. No words, just an image. Another napkin, this one photographed against a table. The imprint showed numbers again. 14.6, and a faint set of letters. SH. He met her at dockside storage once more. She explained. "Section 14.6, she said, showing him a contract. Sub-lease clauses. Shell Company's SH stands for Stone Harbor Holdings. They hold 3 properties tied to Garden Street. Guess who sits on their board?" She handed him a photograph. It was one of his own board members, smiling at a gala, champagne glass raised. Victor's stomach dropped. "It's not just strangers," Elena said quietly. "It's people you've let sit at your table. People who cheered when you bragged." He didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear alone, but because of the choice forming in front of him, like a precipice. He could expose them all, risking ruin, ridicule, maybe worse. Or he could retreat, pretend ignorance, let the machine roll on. but he kept seeing Elena's face across the cafe table, calm and unyielding. He kept hearing her words. Some men are very good at making a fortune and very bad at making a decision. By dawn, he knew which kind of man he would choose to be. He sent another email. This one wasn't to his board or his staff. It was to the press. And with that, Victor Caldwell, the millionaire who had built his life on showing off his wealth, stepped into the one thing money could never buy back once spent: the truth. By noon, Victor Caldwell's name was everywhere. Cable news panels ran his midnight statement on loop, voices arguing over whether he was a hero blowing the whistle on himself or just another opportunist staging redemption. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire turns against his own board." Victor Caldwell, crusader or con man? On social media, clips of his gala speeches were cut against images of shuttered community centers. One viral post paired his smiling ribbon cutting with a boarded-up door stamped "Closed," captioned, "From scissors to silence in 10 months." The machine was roaring. Inside his office tower, the air had changed. Assistants who once bustled around him with eager deference now moved with the caution of people navigating a collapsing bridge. Lawyers called hourly, their voices climbing in pitch with each new headline. Donors froze funds. One even left a voicemail. "Until this blows over, Victor, consider us on pause. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. The phrase landed like a nail in his chest. By 3 o'clock, the board convened an emergency meeting. It wasn't in the sleek conference room this time, but in a private suite of the Sterling Club, symbolic, pointed. The chandelier's glare felt sharper than usual. Victor entered to find 11 faces waiting, arranged like a jury that had already decided the verdict. At the head of the table sat Martin Hale, co-founder of a venture firm, and a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He was also the face in the photograph Elena had shown him, the one tied to Stone Harbor Holdings. "Victor," Hale said, tone dripping with false warmth, "you've caused quite a storm." "I've exposed theft," Victor corrected. Hale spread his hands. "Strong word. What I see is you undermining the very institution you built, publicly, without consulting us." "I sent the evidence," Victor said. "You all knew by yesterday morning. Did any of you deny it?" The silence that followed was damning, but Hale leaned forward, voice low. "You think this is about right and wrong. It's about survival. You've put a target on your back, on our backs. Do you think regulators will thank you? They'll feed on you first, then move on. That's how it works." Victor's jaw clenched. He could feel sweat at his collar. "Then let them. Better to burn out corruption than keep feeding it." Hale's smile widened. "Noble words. But nobility is expensive. How much are you willing to lose, Victor? Your companies? Your penthouse? Your reputation?" Victor opened his mouth, but Hale cut him off, voice sharpening. "Or your life?" The words hung heavy. For a second, no one moved. Then Hale leaned back casually, sipping his scotch. "Because accidents happen, my friend. Stairwells are slippery. Cars misjudge red lights. I'd hate for your crusade to end before it begins." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at their hands. Victor stood. "Threats won't stop me." He walked out, chest burning, hands trembling, not with fear, but with rage. Outside, his phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Meet me, now, dockside. Bring nothing." When he arrived at Unit 12, the fluorescent light was already on. Elena stood over the folding table, documents spread like a mosaic. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried an urgency he hadn't seen before. "They've threatened you," she said, not asked. He nodded. "One of them practically promised an accident." Her mouth tightened. "That means they're desperate. You hit a nerve." He stepped closer. "Hale? He's tied to Stone Harbor. He's in deep." "I know," she said. "But you're not ready for how deep." She slid a new set of files toward him. Bank transfers, shell company chains, offshore accounts. At the bottom, his own signature on documents authorizing funds that were later funneled into Hale's companies. Victor's breath caught. These look like I signed off on it." "You did," Elena said quietly. "But you didn't know what you were signing. They buried these clauses in sub-agreements. You trusted them. They used your name as cover." He staggered back a step, the weight of realization pressing on his chest. "So I'm not just complicit by negligence. I'm complicit by paper." "They wanted it that way," Elena said. "If everything collapsed, you'd fall first. That's why you have to stay ahead of them. Control the narrative. Own the truth before they weaponize it." He ran a hand over his face. "And if I can't?" She looked at him steadily. "Then you'll go down. But you won't go alone." The next day, federal investigators arrived. Not state federal. Suits sharper, eyes colder, questions sharper still. They seized hard drives, interviewed staff, demanded files. Cameras caught them entering the building. The footage hit evening news with brutal immediacy. Caldwell Foundation, under federal investigation. Victor's phone rang non-stop. Friends, enemies, journalists. One reporter shouted outside his building, "Mr. Caldwell, are you confessing to fraud?" He ignored them all. That night, Elena met him on a rooftop parking lot overlooking the river. The city spread below them, glittering and indifferent. "You're in the middle now," she said. "They'll try everything. Bribery, threats, smear campaigns. They'll say you're doing this for attention, for ego, for leverage. You can't fight on their terms. You fight with proof." Victor stared out at the skyline. "You make it sound like war." "It is," she said simply, "but war fought with paper and law instead of bullets. Though sometimes the lines blur." As if on cue, a car across the lot revved its engine, headlights flaring. Victor froze. Elena grabbed his arm, pulling him back just as the car sped past, close enough that the wind whipped his jacket. The vehicle disappeared into the night. Victor's pulse thundered in his ears. "They're escalating," Elena said grimly. "You don't have much time." 2 days later, a video surfaced online. Grainy footage of Victor at a private party, laughing, drink in hand, boasting about a deal. The caption, "Millionaire admits to exploiting loopholes." It spread like wildfire. His phone lit with reporters, demanding comment. Even Leona Drake, his one ally, called with panic in her voice. "They're painting you as the villain, Victor. If this sticks, everything collapses. Your companies, your freedom." Victor gripped the napkin in his pocket. The absurd talisman had become the only thing that kept him tethered. He met Elena that night. "They're trying to bury me," he said. She shook her head. No, they're trying to erase you. But they made a mistake. She handed him another document, a whistleblower affidavit, signed by an anonymous insider at Stone Harbor, detailing exactly how Hale's companies orchestrated the fraud. Victor's eyes widened. Who? Doesn't matter, Elena cut in. What matters is, you're not alone. For the first time, he believed her. The showdown came sooner than expected. The federal investigators scheduled a formal hearing. Public, cameras allowed. Victor was summoned. So was Martin Hale. The room buzzed with tension as the hearing began. Reporters filled the benches. Flashbulbs popped. Victor took his seat, napkin folded in his pocket, palms damp. Hale sat across from him, calm, confident, lips curved in that perpetual, not smile. Questions flew. Investigators pressed Victor on signatures, on funds, on contracts. Hale smirked, playing the innocent, deflecting with polished charm. Then came the moment. Elena's file, the affidavit submitted into evidence by Victor's attorney. Pages that named names, dates, transfers. The room shifted palpably as investigators leaned in, eyes narrowing at Hale. This is fabricated, Hale scoffed. But there was a crack in his tone. The investigators pressed harder, and for the first time, Victor saw it. Hale sweating. The millionaire who had strutted into the Sterling Club with a laugh that could shatter glass now sat silent, watching the machine he'd spent his life serving begin to turn on him. And Victor realized the truth Elena had been pointing to all along. It wasn't about showing wealth. It was about showing what wealth had hidden. That night, Victor walked alone through the city streets, the roar of traffic like applause and accusation. He wasn't free. Not yet. The investigation would drag on. Enemies would strike again. But something inside had shifted. He no longer felt like a man performing. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something raw, terrifying, and real. And in his pocket, the napkin still waited. The smallest, cheapest slip of paper in a world of marble and glass. But it carried the weight of everything. The courthouse smelled of old wood and sharper things. Fear, ambition, sweat trapped in suits. It was the kind of building that made every step echo louder than intended, like an accusation in marble. Victor Caldwell adjusted his collar as he entered the chamber. Cameras were already rolling, lenses blinking like unblinking eyes. Outside, protesters carried signs that swung between "Justice for our communities" and "Caldwell is a fraud." The world had chosen sides before the gavel struck. Across the aisle, Martin Hale sat with his legal team, immaculate as ever. His navy tie was a blade, his smile a dagger. He leaned back, as if the hearing were theater, staged for his amusement. Victor's hands trembled as he set down a thick binder. Inside were contracts, bank records, photographs, affidavits. Evidence Elena and her unseen coalition had gathered with painstaking care. Evidence that made the difference between a crusader and a scapegoat. The lead investigator's voice cut through the buzz. "Mr. Caldwell, you've been accused of knowingly funneling charitable funds into shell companies. Do you deny these charges?" The question landed like a hammer. Every camera turned. Every breath seemed to hold. Victor inhaled, his chest tight. He thought of the easy answer, the polished denial, the spin that would buy him time. But then his fingers brushed the folded napkin in his pocket, and he remembered Elena's words. Some men are very good at making a fortune, and very bad at making a decision. I don't deny that my name is on those documents, Victor said, voice steady. But I do deny that I acted knowingly. Those signatures were mine. The fraud was theirs. And here is the proof. He opened the binder. Page after page hit the desk. False invoices, property transfers, internal emails. One by one, the threads formed a net, and in the center of that net was Martin Hale. The investigator flipped through the exhibits. Mr. Hale, do you have a response? Hale chuckled. Fabrications. Creative storytelling. You can spin any numbers to make a lie look real. But his voice wavered. Sweat beaded at his temple. Cameras zoomed. Victor didn't look away. For once, it wasn't him on trial in the court of public opinion. It was Hale, the man who had hidden theft inside clean contracts, who had weaponized Victor's signature as camouflage. Check the dates, Victor said. Check the transfers. Cross-reference the Delaware shell with Stone Harbor Holdings. And then tell me who profited when the centers closed. The room shifted. Investigators whispered to one another, pens scratching furiously. A judge's gavel struck once for silence, and Hale, for the first time, looked small. Outside, the storm broke. News alerts flooded phones within minutes. Evidence links board member Hale to shell companies. Caldwell cooperation yields major break in fraud investigation. Protesters shouted, cameras swarmed. Some cheered Victor, others cursed him. But for the first time, he wasn't playing for their approval. He walked through the chaos with his head high, knowing he had traded applause for something heavier, but cleaner. Truth. That night, he found Elena waiting on the same rooftop where headlights had nearly ended him days before. The city stretched wide, alive and unforgiving. You did it, she said simply. He shook his head. We did it. Without your evidence, I'd be finished. Her eyes softened. Without your choice, the evidence would still be gathering dust. You didn't just show wealth this time. You showed the truth. He let out a long breath. The foundation is in ruins. My board is gone. My reputation, God knows what's left. She tilted her head. Ruins make room for rebuilding. Reputation can be rewritten. But the people who lost those centers? They'll remember who fought for them, even if it came late. The wind tugged at her hair. For a moment, she looked less like a waitress and more like a sentinel, someone who had always stood guard, unseen until the moment demanded her. Will I ever be free of it? He asked quietly. No, she said. That's not how truth works. It doesn't erase the past. It redefines it. They stood in silence, the hum of the city below, like a restless heart. Victor pulled the napkin from his pocket, unfolded and creased from too many nights in his hand. You can't spend your way out of what's coming. He read the words again, softer this time, almost grateful. He held it out to her. This belongs to you. But she shook her head. No, it belongs to you now. A reminder. Paper, cheap and fragile, can bring down marble and glass. He smiled faintly, the first honest smile in months. And what about you? She turned toward the skyline. There's always another room, another table, another man who thinks money makes him untouchable. I'll be there. When he looked back, she was gone, slipped into the night the way she had entered his life, quietly, decisively, leaving only the echo of truth behind. Weeks later, reforms began. The Caldwell Foundation was dismantled and rebuilt under new oversight. Transparency baked into its bones. Garden Street's assets were seized, redirected into real community projects. Hale was indicted, his smile finally gone. Victor stepped down from his companies, choosing instead to work quietly with the same communities he once exploited. He poured his wealth not into marble halls, but into brick and mortar centers that stayed open, with budgets published for anyone to see. The press still called him the fallen millionaire, sometimes the redeemed one. He no longer cared which. Because every time doubt gnawed, every time old habits whispered, he reached into his pocket and felt the fragile crease of a napkin. And he remembered. Victor Caldwell had once lived to show off his wealth, but in the end, it was a waitress who showed him the truth he'd been hiding from all along. And this time, he chose to face it.